Thank you for joining me today for Chapter 10 of Stories from Poplar Creek. Today we follow James as he navigates loss, memory, and change in the wake of receiving a sorrowful letter. We have another wedding to attend as well. Through moments of family reflection, the story explores how grief, connection, and hope endure amid life's transitions. Please hit like or subscribe and let me know if you'd like to hear stories about anyone in particular. And I look forward to your comments, and I'll see you on the other side. James stared at the letter. He took his book and slipped it neatly inside and headed out toward where his mother, father, and sister lay to rest. He knelt down and brushed away the dust and dirt that obscured the names. He sat back and pulled the letter from the pages. Good morning, Father, Mother, Rose. I bring news, although you likely knew it before I learned of it. I've had a letter from Edwin. Here, I'll read it aloud. Dear James, I write with sad news. Our brother Fred has passed this life. When he didn't come in for supper, Mary went to call him in from the field. She found him lying amongst the barley. It seems he went quietly and gently from an apoplexy. His last sight was of the bluest sky you've ever seen, clouds so white floating above. Mary said she found him with a small smile upon his face. He was a kind and steady brother. Mary is holding up and is well cared for. She has gone to live with her eldest boy and his wife. I am feeling rudderless, James. I've followed Fred my entire life, from boyhood into manhood. He was always there, just ahead and in my sights. The world is changing so quickly. Euphemia and I witnessed the arrival of the Northern Pacific train in Tacoma. It was a wonder. The country is united by a rail of steel and wood. Who would have thought it possible? Perhaps one day you and I will ride it. It would be good to lay eyes on you again. I am grateful for your news that you and your Helen are well. Your loving brother, Edwin. Fresh tears filled James's eyes, and he let them run freely. He relived the moment when he watched Fred and Edwin ride away from Poplar Creek, from him. By the time he made it back to the house, Helen had finished the morning's work and was sitting at the table, reading over the receipts for seed and supplies. She looked up at him, and her eyes told him she knew everything before he said a word. Helen set the papers aside and poured him a cup of coffee. She set it down in front of him and bent to kiss him. She sat down beside him, their elbows almost touching, and waited for him to speak. He tried, but his voice went out on him. He cleared his throat and tried again. Fred has passed. I still ask myself, why didn't I go with them? I'm not sure I'll ever understand, he said, his voice cracking. I just knew that I couldn't. What sense is there in that? There were 2 roads to follow. Each lay out to a future unknown, and you chose one, James. That's all that any person can do with just one life, Helen said softly. James found Margaret at the Turner house, elbows deep in suds, scrubbing surgical tools. He stood in the doorway watching her work with a ferocity that reminded him of his mother years ago. She did not hear him enter. Her attention was bound to the delicate curves of a hemostat, her jaw set in a line of concentration. Margaret had her mother's eyes, but the rest of her was pure alder, the way she stood, rooted and straight. He cleared his throat and she glanced up, a flicker of surprise softening into a smile. "Da! What brings you?" Margaret said, rinsing the last of the soap from her wrists and drying them on her apron. "Have you decided to let me pat your thumb after all?" James flexed his hand, the cut on his thumb still weeping a little, and gave her a look. He took a seat, and Margaret went to the drawer for iodine and bandages. "Thought maybe you and I could get out tomorrow, if the day allows it." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Hunting or mending fences?" "Hunting," he said, and saw her face brighten. She tied off the bandage. "Keep it clean and dry," she instructed. Early the next morning she fetched her rifle and a battered canvas pack, slinging it over her shoulder in a single practiced motion. She headed off in the cool of the morning to meet her father at the livery. They set out and passed the schoolhouse. From the window of his room, Emery's Bowen watched Margaret ride into the hills. He sipped his coffee and wondered about this, half woman, half sprite. The land was still wet and waking from spring's thaw. The sun was not yet strong enough to dry the dew on the tall grasses. Father and daughter walked the creek's edge in companionable silence, the only sounds the scuff of boots and the lowing of distant cows. At the first rise, Margaret stopped to pick violets for the pocket of her coat. James smiled. After a half-mile, she asked, "What's the quarry today?" James shrugged. "Rabbit, maybe? Or we could go further out, see if the deer have started moving again." Margaret nodded. They tracked through the low woods, James reading sign in the mulch, Margaret listening for the hidden music of animal movement. At the edge of a clearing, he paused, motioned her to crouch beside him, and pointed at the faint seam of a trail where the grass had been pressed down in parallel lines. Deer for sure. "I remember how Fred could walk upon a buck so close he could see the nostrils flare," James said, voice low and rough. Margaret shook her head. "You never told me about that." A letter came. "Seems poor Fred passed last month." She looked at him, sudden stillness in her face. "I'm sorry, Da." James shrugged, but the weight of it pressed down on him all the same. "When we were kids, he taught me how to find the trails, how to fish with nothing but a bit of string and patience." The trail bent down to the creek bed where the trees grew closer and the air took on the clean chill of running water. James crouched by the bank and showed Margaret the place where the deer had crossed, the mud pocked with fresh tracks. He waited for her to take the lead, and she did, picking a path up the opposite bank with quiet confidence. They tracked for an hour, stopping only once to rest and share a handful of dried apples from Margaret's pack. She asked questions about Fred and Edwin and Rose, their half-remembered stories tumbling out in fragments. Her inquiries were always gentle and natural. She had a way of drawing him out without him noticing. James told her about the time Fred split a tree with a single axe blow, and how Edwin used to skip rocks so far they vanished into myth. He told her about Rose, too, how she could hush a room with her singing, how she never lost her temper, how all three boys had promised to look after her and failed. "Sickness takes even the most cared for. I hope you can put that burden down," Margaret added. James watched a hawk spiral overhead. Sometimes I think I miss what I hoped we would be more than what we were." Margaret nodded. "I think about that a lot, with our family. I'm grateful that we are here in this place together." They moved on, each to their own thoughts. The woods thinned, and James pointed to a narrow game trail. "Let's take this way back," he said. less likely to be muddy. Margaret followed, and soon they came on a cluster of wild rose bushes, thick with thorns and white petals. James stopped, his gaze fixed on the fragile blooms. "Your uncle was telling me how proud he was of your work in the surgery and with Mrs. Ingram. He said that you were a great comfort." "Oh, Da, I've never been so scared. I can't explain it, but when we went into the surgery, I sort of stepped outside of myself. All I saw was Mrs. Ingram, the instruments, and I saw exactly how the knife would remove the mass. Your uncle spoke with me about your training." James saw Margaret tense. "He proposes that you attend college in Pennsylvania." I don't know what to say or to think," Margaret said. "You have time to come to your decision." "But what do you think about it, Da?" she asked. "Well, if it's in your mind to be a doctor, then do it. Just do it, Maggie." Margaret stepped forward and with careful fingers plucked a single blossom, tucking it into the band of her hat. "For luck," she said, and James laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob. They did not find a deer that day, but they returned home with the quiet satisfaction of having gone out into the world together and come back, changed just enough. At the porch, James put a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. You'll do well, whatever you set your mind to." Margaret looked at him, her eyes bright. "Oh, thank you, Da." He watched her go inside, then stood a while, hand resting on the porch rail. The sky was darkening and the clouds threatening rain. A surprise knock on the door of the Turner home roused Isaac from his morning coffee and paper. Emery's Bowen stood in the doorway, backed by the early summer light. "Do come in, Mr. Bowen. Can I offer you some coffee?" Isaac stepped aside. "Thank you, sir. I would appreciate that." Isaac led Emery's to the sitting room and set down a cup of coffee. "I am hoping to impose a favor on you." Isaac looked up curious. "You see, the class is studying biology, and I was hoping you might present a lesson on human biology," Emery's explained. Isaac grimaced. "Your students don't want some old crusty doctor standing up and droning on." Just then Margaret erupted from the direction of the kitchen. "Uncle, your breakfast is getting—" "Oh, hello, Mr. Bowen." "Margaret is your teacher. Margaret will do," Isaac said with a smile, happy to have found an escape. "It will be good practice," he finished with certainty. "What am I agreeing to, Uncle?" "You've been gang-pressed into teaching a lesson on human biology," Emery's laughed. "I'll leave you two to work out the details. My breakfast is getting cold," and Isaac made good his escape. "What topics would you like to cover, Mr. Bowen?" "Basic anatomy will do. We're exploring structures. I can cover plant biology." "May I see your sketchbook again?" Margaret asked. Emery's pulled it from his pocket. Margaret retrieved a flower from a box she kept on the mantel. "I found this while hunting with Da." She handed him the dried blossom, and Emery's flipped through the pages until he found the sketch of it. "There it is. Beautiful," insisted Margaret. Emery flushed. "I tried. My mother believed that a thing properly drawn is a thing better remembered." "As for me," Margaret said, "that's how I learned anatomy, by drawing and redrawing until my hands remembered what my mind could not." They traded the book back and forth, comparing notes on roots and thorns, medicinal uses and folklore. Their conversation drifted from botany to literature, from Greek myth to the news of the world beyond Poplar Creek. With each exchange, the initial formality eased, replaced by a rhythm that felt both natural and new. There came a lull, long enough for Margaret to feel the flush of her own face. Emery seemed to sense it too, and he grew still, watching her with an intensity as if he wished to memorize her in this exact moment. He said very softly, "You speak with your whole self, Miss Alder." She ducked her head. "Do I?" "I meant only that your voice, it's difficult to forget. I've never known anyone who seemed so alive in their words." Margaret's throat tightened at this, a strange wave of embarrassment and pride flooding her. For a moment she saw herself through his eyes, not as the awkward second daughter, nor the shadow of her mother, nor the sturdy farm girl with mud on her boots, but as something vital and singular. They heard the clatter of footsteps outside, and the spell was broken. Emery stood, gathering his things. "Thank you, Miss Alder. I'd best go." "I'll make lesson notes and have them to you to review," she replied, and let her smile linger. As he stepped into the sunlight, he turned back to her, one hand on the doorframe. "If you ever wish to trade drawings, you'll let me know, Miss Alder?" She nodded, unable to keep the grin from her face. "Margaret, or my friends call me Meggie, if you wish." "I would like it very much if you called me Emery's." He smiled. He walked away, and Margaret watched him go, the sound of his boots on the dusty road echoing longer than it should have. She turned back to the desk, touching the spine of the borrowed book. The room felt charged, alive with possibility. Margaret closed her eyes and for a moment listened to the empty air as if it might remember the conversation long after she had left it behind. A little bell in the Ingram home announced the arrival of a pigeon. Ada ran out to retrieve the message, carefully untying the tiny canister from its leg. Charles intercepted her in the yard. "Who is it for?" Ada squinted at the small code they had worked out to save space. "This one is for the Alder homestead," Ada replied. The twins saddled up and headed out. Helen met them at the door. She provided a coin and filled their packs with hand pies. The sound of their hooves disappeared into the afternoon drone of bees and summer breeze. Anahu and Alice were finishing their supper before heading out to check on the cows in the back field. Helen topped off their coffee. "Anahu, your father is coming to fetch you home. He will be here in a fortnight." Alice's face masked. Rudy whined. Helen marked the shift of mood in the room. "It's a fine day. After your chores, think you could manage a few fish for dinner?" They ran out the door. Helen watched them ride away from the house, Rudy trailing behind, a little slower than usual. She watched after them, smiling. They were in that tender age between childhood and the worries of adulthood. How beautiful they were in the way they met the world. The afternoon heat had settled in, and Alice and Anahu found refuge under a stand of trees along the creek. The water rolled lazily past, and the fish darted to the surface, snatching bugs. "I hope you can come visit us." "Visit me again," Alice said as she checked her line. Anahu sat thoughtfully for a long while. "You won't forget me, Allie, will you?" he asked tentatively. He looked over and saw Alice crying. She wiped her face, embarrassed. Anahu put his arm around Alice, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They let the summer afternoon sit. They felt the warm air and the cool mingle on their skin and caught the fragrance of warm earth. Alice looked up. "I will never forget you, Allie," Anahu whispered as his lips met hers. First love bloomed with the feelings, joy, and sadness of youth. Promises were made. They would not forget. They would write letters. Hopes were shared with caresses, and fears were drowned in kisses. 2 weeks flew by, and William arrived. After supper was shared and friendships enjoyed, the elders shared goodbyes and watched as William and Anahu rode away. Alice stood until their forms disappeared from view. Later, as Anahu and William dropped onto the trail below the homestead, Anahu turned back and saw Alice on her horse on the hill above them. He waved, and she waved back before she turned and rode away. Jonas was working in the smithy when he happened to look up to see Henry Fisher pacing in the yard. Jonas wiped his hands, depositing a fresh layer of soot. He walked out to meet him. "What brings you, Reverend?" he called. "Hello, Jonas. Please, today it's Henry. I was hoping to trouble you for advice." "I see. How can I help?" Henry shifted nervously. Jonas understood more than he let on. "It seems to me that you and Mrs. Ingram, that is, if you don't mind me saying, it seems that your wife has affection for you, and As I'm soon to be a husband, I'm hoping you can tell me how to... Henry's thoughts trailed. I've never been with a woman, and I wish for Catherine to enjoy... Here he gave up. Jonas laughed and clapped him on the back. This is good. This is good. Your concern with your wife's comfort is a good start to being a good husband. Henry exhaled. Jonas explained the basics, Henry barraging him with questions. But when Jonas described some of the finer points of lovemaking, Henry went still. Encourage her to tell you what she wants. Be patient and take joy in exploring her. You and she will create a unique way of coming together. Do you understand? I have a book if you like. Later that morning, Henry waved to Emery's as they passed on the road. Henry ran to the creek and found the coolest spot and dove in. The cold of the water could not stop the heat in his body. Lillian fastened the last of the buttons on Catherine's wedding dress. She looked up to see Catherine view herself in the mirror, smoothing the skirt and noticing her own curves. Lillian always admired how naturally Catherine carried her looks. She was very beautiful, but her beauty never defined her. What do you think of the color? Lillian asked. She had chosen the dove gray to bring out the unusual color of Catherine's eyes. Small apricot flowers floated along the neckline. It's beautiful, Aunt Lillian. I couldn't have imagined anything more lovely. Lillian gently lifted up Catherine's hair. I think you should wear your hair like this, just some on the top, but let the rest sit on your shoulders. What do you think? Catherine turned and hugged her aunt. Oh, thank you, Auntie. Helen packed the wagon with pies and meats. James emerged from the house wearing his best coat. He stopped to take in the sight of Helen wearing a peach-colored dress and a new hat. Her large brown eyes met his. Some things had never changed in all these years. He smiled, and Helen blushed. Allie, hurry on down, called Helen. Alice bounced out the front door, fussing at her collar. Her curls moved with her. James noted how grown-up she looked and sighed. He was half hoping she'd stay little forever. They arrived at the church, and James walked over to the Turner home to escort Catherine to the church. Inside the parsonage, Henry Fisher worked his tie nervously. Here, let me, Henry, Isaac offered. Once the tie was negotiated, Isaac took out a small flask and handed it to Henry. Henry took it gratefully. Ambrose would preside over the service. The churchyard was transformed into a place of almost magical anticipation. Whitewashed benches formed a square on the new mown grass, and the early summer air carried the scent of lilac, wild roses, and cut hay. Mrs. Goodwin bustled at the edges, clapping her hands for the boys to finish hanging the bunting. On the broad plank tables, every dish and vessel in Poplar Creek seemed to be pressed into service. There were plates layered with fried chicken, porcelain bowls of pickled beans, buttered loaves of bread, and pies in every variety, rhubarb, apple, gooseberry, and blackberry. Lanterns made from glass jars and bent wire hung ready for dusk, their bellies stuffed with candles and trimmed for easy lighting. The children, already sticky with anticipation, clustered around the cakes with eyes fixed and hands clasped behind their backs. Lightning bugs waited in the grass and the lower boughs, and it seemed that they, too, had been called to observe the day's proceedings. Jonas Ingram was at the spit, sleeves rolled and face ruddy from proximity to the fire. He basted the turning haunches with practiced hand, occasionally calling out to his eldest boy to fetch more wood or salted water. He was never one to take the stage, but today he relished the role of provider. Mrs. Ingram had dressed their daughter Ada in a sky-blue frock, and Ada darted between guests, ferrying messages and teasing her brother Charles, who bore the serious responsibility of ushering. Charlotte trimmed the tables with strings of rose blossoms. The band set up at the far end and tuned their instruments for the evening celebration. At last, Ambrose opened the church door and called everyone in to take their places. Lillian made one last adjustment to her dress, then kissed her niece. "I'll see you at the church, dear." Catherine entered the sitting room where James waited. James stood, his eyes filling. Catherine took his arm. "I love you, Da. And I love you, Kathy. No father could be more proud. This is what you want?" "Yes, I want him." "Then I suppose we shouldn't keep him waiting." Ambrose took his place at the front of church with Henry standing by. At last the doors opened, admitting a burst of soft summer light. From it Catherine emerged, and Henry's breath caught. Her hair shimmered, and her eyes were shining. The world was muffled beyond the edges, and all he saw was her. "Well, do you?" repeated Ambrose. Henry looked to him, startled. What? "For pity's sake, son, do you want to marry this woman?" Ambrose laughed. Yes, I do." And at that, Henry kissed Catherine. "I didn't say you could kiss the—" "Oh, go on then." Ambrose pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd giggled and applauded. Helen leaned her head on James's shoulder, and he kissed her head. "Do you remember?" he whispered to Helen. "I do," she smiled back. It was a joyous evening. Catherine and Henry marveled at the outpouring of affection from family and friends. They made their rounds together, thanking the well-wishers. Catherine caught herself looking at Henry, lost in her own private thoughts. She and her mother had spent the night before talking about affection between lovers. Although Catherine expected that sleeping with Henry was a pleasant proposition, she was also accustomed to taking on the world with a heightened sense of preparedness. But for the life of her, she could not conceive of this terrain. The mysteries of it both thrilled and disconcerted her. At last, she and Henry found themselves alone in the parsonage. The evening was warm, so Henry opened a window to let in a breeze. The evening's fragrance drifted in. Catherine set her bouquet in water and turned to Henry. He smiled. "Kathy, I want you to know that we can take this as slowly as you like. I hope you will tell me what pleases you." Catherine smiled. "I hardly know what to expect, Henry." Henry bent to kiss her. The kiss deepened, and Henry felt Catherine's body move into his. Catherine pulled away and looked into his eyes. "Would it be all right? Henry unfastened his shirt slowly and let it fall to the ground. His eyes never left hers. Catherine explored his chest and belly with her fingertips, her eyes wide with wonder when she felt his pulse quicken. He then unbuttoned his breeches and stepped out of them. She stepped back and studied the form of him. He was lean but muscled, strong legs and shoulders and carved stomach. She noted the trail of hair that led to his manhood. Catherine turned so Henry could unfasten the buttons of her dress. It slid to the floor with a swoosh of fabric. She turned to him and unlaced her bodice and loosened her drawers. When at last she stood before him, he touched her gently, stroking the rise of her breasts and the curve of her waist. She was tall and long-limbed, and he was transfixed by the curves of her body. Henry scooped her up and laid her in bed, settling on top of her. She felt her skin come alive as their legs tangled and their kisses became desperate. Catherine expected that Henry would take her then, but he began laying kisses across her body, moving slowly down. Her breath caught when his mouth found the soft folds between her legs. I want to touch you, Henry." He came up next to her and kissed her deeply, his fingers bunching in her hair. Catherine felt the muscles of Henry's back and smelled the scent of him. She grasped Henry's erection and felt him moan in her mouth. Henry came on top of her then, and she drew him inside with her legs. He began to move inside of her, and her hips rose to meet him. "Catherine, wait just a moment, He took a deep breath, and she felt the stillness. He began to move again in response to her urgency. Their pleasure broke the evening's quiet. They shuddered in each other's arms, then lay quietly. "I love you, Kathy," Henry whispered in her hair. "I want to be a good husband to you." Kathy smiled. "I love you, Henry Fisher." "I want to do that again."